It is January 19th, 2015, and currently Canada's federal government debt, not including the debt of the various provincial governments, is over $614 billion. Given the population of Canada, that amounts to over $17,000 for every man, woman, and child. The question becomes, which one of these men, women, and children are going to be stuck paying the debt? When you start to look at this question, that's when you might start to develop an opinion about our public debt. The government likes to emphasize that currently 74% of the government's unmatured debt is owed to Canadians, including citizens and domestic institutions holding federal bonds, treasury bills, and other forms of the debt. The idea being, well, if we owe this money to ourselves, then I guess it's not so bad. But it is bad. It's actually very bad. I say this because while every Canadian might owe this money, not every Canadian is going to pay this money. And when interest is paid on this debt, and when the debt is finally repaid, not every Canadian is going to get the money. Let's look at each of these issues separately. First, who owes versus who pays. As for who owes, well, we all owe the public debt. That money was borrowed by the federal government on behalf of all Canadians, because Canadians, like most everyone else in the world, prefer to spend money just a little more than we like to earn money. But here's the thing. Just because we all owe the money doesn't mean we're all going to pay it. With household debt, if you borrow money for a new car, a vacation, or a flat-screen TV, then you also end up paying the debt. The people who benefited from the debt are the people who pay for it. Fair enough. It's not terribly prudent financial planning, but the people who do the planning are the people who are stuck with the consequences. With public debt, it's not quite the same. That's because $614 billion isn't exactly something that can be amortized over 48 months. Even optimistic estimates of a national debt retirement schedule suggest that it would take hundreds of years to pay it off, if anyone decided that that was something they wanted to do. That little realization more or less guarantees that the people who were responsible for borrowing the money, most of which has been borrowed since 1970, will not be the same people who pay the debt off in, say, the year 2215. All right, but maybe this isn't all so bad because we owe the money to ourselves. Okay, well then, I want you to think about one thing. Who's going to get the money when it is repaid? Was anyone thinking that the government was just going to write everyone in Canada a nice big check? Not likely. I'll remind you of the very same thing that the federal government says when they point out that we owe this money to ourselves. They say, the debt is owed to Canadians, including citizens and domestic institutions holding federal bonds, treasury bills, and other forms of the debt. So now, ask yourselves, who holds federal bonds, treasury bills, and other forms of government debt? Rich people or poor people? Well, how many government bonds are you holding right now? Probably the answer to that question squarely places you in one income bracket or the other. Just in case my point hasn't been made clear, government debt is owed and paid by all Canadian taxpayers, but only those Canadians who actually hold government bonds and treasury bills receive interest and principal payments on this debt. I hate to generalize, but in this case I will. Generally, wealthy people and institutions hold government bonds and treasury bills. By the way, those are the same people who enjoy much lower tax rates on carried interest and capital gains than working Canadians pay on the income they earn through working. So, in the final analysis, public debt basically allows us to enjoy a higher standard of living today than we can actually afford, while forcing future generations to endure a lower standard of living than they could have afforded because they will have to pay for our debt. Moreover, when interest is paid on the debt, which is constantly occurring and accounts for about 10% of the government's annual expenditures, it essentially amounts to a wealth transfer from all Canadian taxpayers to those Canadians who hold Canadian bonds and treasury bills.